The history of Acadian legacy involves both the racism exhibited toward the West African transatlantic slaves in the Western Hemisphere and the origins of Africans generally, which led to the idea that Africans had no history, and the bigger need of Julius Appert to make Semites white, to accommodate the white ancestry of European Jews. To understand this dichotomy, we have to go back to look at the history of renowned scholarship surrounding the rise of Sumero-Akkadian studies. The study of the Sumerians, Acadians, Assyrians and Elamites began with the decipherment of the cuneiform script by Henry Rawlinson in 1851, whom had spent most of his career in the Orient. He recognized the ancient model of history, and understood that this particular civilization was founded by the Cushite or Hamitic people of the Bible. As a result, Rawlinson was surprised during his research to discover that the founders of the Mesopotamian civilization were of Cushite origin. He made it clear that the Semitic speakers of Akkad and the non-Semitic speakers of Sumer were both black or Negro people who called themselves Sag-Gig-Ga, which means black heads. In Rawlinson's day, the agglutinative, Turanian-speaking Sumerian people were recognized as Akkadian or Chaldean, while the Semitic-speaking blacks were called Assyrians. Rawlinson identified these Akkadians as Turanian or Scythic people, and he made it very clear that these ancient Scythic, or Turanian-speaking people were Cushites or blacks. A major supporter and colleague of Rawlinson was Edward Hincks, born in 1792 to 1866. Hincks continued Rawlinson's work and identified the ancient group as Chaldeans, and also called them Turanian speakers. Hincks, though, never discussed their ethnic origin. A person that entered into the study of Akkadians years later was a man by the name of Julius Appert, of 1825 to 1905. Appert was a German born of Jewish parents. He made it clear that the Chaldean and Akkadian people spoke different languages. Appert began to popularize the idea that the Sumerians were related to the contemporary Altaic and Turanian-speaking people, e.g., Turks and Magyar Hungarian-speaking people. He made it clear that the Akkadians were Semites like himself. However, these Semitic people were using an agglutinative language, instead of a flexive Semitic language. To support this idea, Appert pointed out that typological features between Sumerian and Altaic languages existed. This feature was agglutination. The problem with identifying the Sumerians as descendants, i.e. ancestors, from contemporary Turanian speakers, resulted from the fact that Sumerian, and the Turkish languages, are not genetically related. However, the quantity of genetically related words constitutes a significant portion of Sumerian vocabulary. Although Appert successfully hid the recognition that the Akkadians and the Sumerians both referred to themselves as Sag-Gig-Ga, black heads, some researchers were unable to follow the status quo and ignore this reality. European researchers that conducted investigations into antiquity. One such European researcher was François Lenormant, who lived between 1837 and 1883. Lenormant was an Assyriologist and archaeologist who was among the foremost Assyriologists in France during his time. Lenormant's work, titled Chaldean Magic, which was first written in 1874 in French and later translated into English, made it clear, following the research of Rawlinson, that the Elamite and Sumerian spoke genetically related languages. This idea was hard to reconcile with the depiction of people on the Persian monuments, especially the Behistun monument, which depicted Negroes with curly hair and beards representing the Assyrians, Jews, and Elamites, who ruled the area. As a result, Appert began to insert more baseless myths about the origins of Sumerians. However, there was no way to keep researchers from who read the original Sumerian, Akkadian, and Assyrian text, that these people recognized that they were ethnically blacks. This fact was made clear by Albert Terrien de Lecouperie of 1845 to 1894. Born in France, de Lecouperie was a well-known linguist and China expert. Although native of France, most of his writings are in English. In the journal he published called The Babylonian and Oriental Record, he outlined many aspects of ancient history. In these pages he made it clear that the Sumerians, Akkadians and even the Assyrians who called themselves Salmat-Kakadi, black-headed people, were all blacks of Kushite origin. Even though de Lecouperie taught at the University of London, the prestige of Appert, and the fact that the main centers for Sumero-Akkadian studies in France and Germany were founded by Appert and/or his students, led to researchers ignoring the evidence that the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Assyrians were black. Regardless of the historical lies, the cuneiform evidence makes it clear that the Sumerians, Acadians, and Assyrians recognized themselves as Negroes, blackheads. This fact was supported by the statues of Gudea, the Acadians and Assyrians. Plus the Behistun monument made it clear that the Elamites were also blacks. To the Greeks the name Sephenes was synonymous with Ethiopians. I quote, "The opinion which has been preserved by Hellenicus counts them as one of the two elements of the race inhabiting the countries watered by the lower course of the Euphrates and Tigris, the famous Ethiopians or Cushites of Babylon, whose existence is proved by so many passages of classical antiquity in the sacred writings." End quote. Even the Christian Bible connects with these Cushites the name of Nimrod, which is used both as the name of a hero, and the name of a place, like all those contained in the same chapter of Genesis, page 338. In the Christian Bible, specifically Genesis 10:7, we are told that the sons of Ham are Cush, Egypt, Kemet, Put, Punt, i.e. Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula, along with Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Canaan. We are further informed in Genesis 10:8 that Cush was the father of Nimrod, who was the forebearer of Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Assyria. Now, before we get to the official direct bloodline of the Akkadian Empire of the Levant's closest descendants, which are referred to as the ancient biblical Akkadians, Assyrians, Canaanites, Babylonians and Sumerians, in present day. Let's first confirm it by scientific DNA. Scientists found a mysteriously extinct, ghost, human lineage, that was an even more distant relation than Neanderthals, may have interbred with the ancestors of modern West Africans, significantly contributing to their gene pool, a new study finds. Prior work estimated the ancestors of modern humans split about 700,000 years ago, from the lineage that gave rise to Neanderthals and Denisovans, and the ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans diverged from one another about 400,000 years ago. The story is a bit more tangled than the timeline suggests, as genetic analysis of fossils of these extinct ghost lineages has revealed they once interbred with modern humans, unions that may have endowed the West African lineage with helpful mutations as we began expanding across the world about 194,000 years ago. Neanderthal DNA makes up roughly 1.8% to 2.6% of the genomes of modern humans from outside Africa, whereas Denisovan DNA makes up 4% to 6% of modern Melanesians. Any number of now extinct human lineages that once existed within Africa may have hybridized with modern humans there as well. However, the sparse nature of the ancient human fossil record in Africa makes it difficult to identify DNA from such ghost lineages in modern humans. Instead of hunting for ancient human fossils across Africa, the scientists looked for genetic traces of ghost lineages in modern Africans. They compared 405 genomes from modern people from West Africa with ones from fossils of Neanderthals and Denisovans, focusing on DNA that stood out from the West African genomes roughly as much as Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA did from modern human genomes overall. The researchers detected statistical anomalies they suggested were best explained by interbreeding between West Africans and an unknown ancient human lineage whose ancestors diverged from those of modern humans before the split between Neanderthals and modern humans. 4 West African groups: Yoruba, in southwestern Nigeria; Esan, in southern Nigeria; Gambians, in western Gambia; and Mendi in Sierra Leone, may derive 2% to 19% of their DNA from a ghost lineage, the researchers said. Combining the results across the West African populations, they estimate that the archaic population split from the ancestor of Neanderthals and modern humans, 360,000 years to 1.02 million years ago, and subsequently integrated into the ancestors of present-day Africans 0 to 124,000 years ago, contributing 2 to 19% of their ancestry, the authors said. Dr. Dervasula, and Dr. Sankararaman, also examined the frequencies of archaic DNA segments to investigate whether natural selection could have shaped the distribution of archaic genetic variants. They found 33 loci with an archaic segment frequency of over 50% in Yoruba Africans, and 37 loci in Mendi Africans, they said. Some of these genes are at high frequency across both Yoruba and Yoruba, including NF1, a tumor suppressor gene, MTFR2, a gene involved with mitochondrial aerobic respiration in the testis which is commonly known as the powerhouse of the cells for their pivotal role in the conversion of nutrient-derived energy in the form of ATP molecules, through the mitochondria-housed pathways of citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation. HSD17B2, a gene involved with hormone regulation, KCNIP4, a gene involved with potassium channels, and TRPS1, a gene associated with trichorhinophalangeal syndrome. 3 of these genes have been found in previous scans for positive selection in Yoruba, NF1, KCNIP4, and TRPS1. On the other hand, they did not find elevated frequencies at MUC7, a gene previously found to harbor signatures of archaic introgression. The signals of introgression in the West African populations that was analyzed raise questions regarding the identity of the archaic hominine and its interactions with the modern human populations in Africa, the researchers said. A detailed understanding of archaic introgression and its role of advanced qualities in adapting to diverse environmental conditions will require analysis of genomes from extant and ancient genomes across the geographic range of Africa. These results were published in the journal Science. So, instead of preserving true historic facts of our human history, the dark forces of this world prefers to continue on with this perpetuated lie, by replacing it with a watered-down, whitewashed doctrine of superiority, that actually has no real value to the unseen forces of our divine consciousness, nor the growth for the betterment of our existence. Yet, it been accepted into the core of mainstream that African roots have no place in history, when it deems clear that African roots is the only authentic historical history to embrace, in order to understand the cultural diversities of our existence. Yes, black people, we been slaved, brainwashed, whitewashed, black-coded, exterminated, segregated, oppressed, and treated below less, but never, be ashamed of who you are, because you have the blood of the sacred. And by having the blood of the sacred, you must shine your light. And have love for all life that exists, that includes the impostors, and the oppressors, as they too are all a distant extension of your ancient blood, which is ultimately, the direct linkage to the infinite supreme being, as it is your calling, and cosmic duty, to be the example of how to rise out of darkness, and emanate into light, just as it occurred at the very beginning, when our primordial celestial body came into existence from darkness, there was light. Now, let's get to the moment we've been waiting for, and honor our ancestors that came before us, who knew they had the high priest blood of the sacred. These were some of the Acadians, Assyrians, Elamites, Canaanites, Babylonians and Sumerians' descendants, during the pre- and colonial era, before they were eventually all exterminated. A passage from Akanba states, I quote, "After the Western religious and scientific researchers failed to perform their duties right, trying to blind other people, finding ways to deny the Akan and Guan people, from their origin as founders of Chaldar, Babylon, Aramaic kingdoms, Edom, Canaan, Israel, Carthage, Carthage Nova, Ravenna Etruscar, Capua, Creta, Kibi, Bilma, Ghana, and Songhay. We the Akan and Guan folk of today have taken up our tools and have gone beyond our ancient Ghana and Songhay empires until we could break down that untouchable Bible into pieces." End quote. I would say Akanba may just be right, but in order to know definitively, it must be confirmed and supported by factual DNA analysis. So let's get started. To determine this factor, I will be confirming specimen from the DNA phylogenetic tree, also called the evolutionary tree, which is a branching diagram, or a tree showing the evolutionary relationships among various biological ancestors. The two groups in question are the modern-day Middle Eastern people, and West Africans. Starting with the modern Middle East, which include the Greater Syria, present-day Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, and most of Turkey, southwest of the Middle Euphrates. The modern Middle Eastern people, Y chromosome DNA, is haplogroup J. Subclade M3, 0, 4. Originated 42,900 years ago. Their closest ancestor is haplogroup IJ, which belonged to Caucasus, Pontic-Caspian steppe. Originated 49,700 to 44,600 years ago. Now, for West Africans and West African Americans, of the Bantu expansion from East Africa. Their Y chromosomes. Haplogroup is E, the subclade is E1b1a. Their closest ancestors is in haplogroup DE, which belongs to Central Asia, Andaman Islands, and the Middle East regions. Originated 68,000 to 75,000 years ago. So, there's your answer. Based on the scientific DNA phylogenetic tree. The West and West African Americans, DNA haplogroup E, subclade E1b1a, evolutionary ancestors, came from Central Asia and the Middle Eastern region. Now, since it has been confirmed, let's take a moment to honor our entire West African family, as the kings and queens they are, and as the most sacred human connection to our beloved and divine ancestors. As you can see, the lies and cover-ups runs deeper than we can ever imagine. The reason why I expose this information, because it's important to the soul consciousness of our people, to know the rightful truth of who we really are, and it's even more important for us to do our own research study, and use this information as a stepping stone to beyond than what I've shared, so that we could be the collective force of truth.